12 studios on the video side, we welcome in Dr. Evan Miyakawa, EvanMiya.com, our college basketball analytics insider. Hey, Evan, good to talk to you again.
Glad to be here, guys. And we're really getting into the thick of college basketball season with conference play fully underway, and I'm excited to dig into it.
Yeah, things definitely heat up this time of year. So when it comes to the Big 12, what do your models say about who's at the top of the league, like the top 3 or 4 teams, and in what order?
I would say right now, according to my analytics at EvanMiya.com, there are 3 very clear tiers at the top of the Big 12. You have the Big 2 right now, which is Arizona and Iowa State. I have them ranked first and second in the conference. Arizona clocks in at second nationally overall. Iowa State right behind them at third. And I think they're both absolutely title contenders, both contenders for 1 seeds in the tournament. So I think that is the tier at the top. Right below that, so also, not quite at that level, but very dangerous, is I would put Houston and BYU in that second tier. I have Houston ranked 9th nationally, BYU 11th. And I think both of those teams absolutely have the rosters and the ability to really make some serious damage, either in the Big 12 or in the tournament. And then after that, the next 2 teams I have are Kansas at 18th nationally and Texas Tech at 22nd. Both of these teams are teams that should hopefully comfortably get in the tournament, won't necessarily be probably vying for a Big 12 title, but could be very dangerous in the postseason. Both have some very talented rosters, a lot of hype coming into them for them the preseason, with some ups and downs during the year so far, but very capable of making some noise. So that would be my clear sort of top 6 teams in 3 tiers: Arizona, Iowa State, then Houston, BYU, and then Kansas, Texas Tech.
Always fun to catch up with our buddy Evan Miyakawa, EvanMiya. Check out his great work and the website that he has with his analytics. Evan, curious for your thoughts on where the Big 12 is as a conference in the conference hierarchy. Is it number 1? Is it number 2? Is it number 3?
This has been a very interesting discussion this year, because last year we saw the SEC have probably the greatest season we've seen any conference ever have, and they sort of dethroned the Big 12 a bit, because the Big 12 had been kind of more or less the number 1 conference for several years running. And this year what we've seen is that there's been a lot of interesting discussion, because I think when it comes to conferences that have elite teams at the top, in terms of teams that can win a national title, make a Final Four, or even if you're just counting teams that can make the tournament, the SEC has kind of fallen off a cliff this year, and the Big 12 and the Big 10 have an argument for being the best conferences in the country. But when you actually look at the overall conference from top to bottom, and that's what I do on my website, is I look at every team from your best team to your worst team, averaging out across all those profiles, the SEC still ranks as the best conference in the country slightly, and then you have the Big 12 right after that in second. But I would make the argument that I think the Big 12 has a much, much higher chance of being kind of the premier conference when it comes to the March Madness and the tournament, because the SEC doesn't really have any teams anywhere near as established as Arizona and Iowa State, as I mentioned, nor kind of in that second tier of Final Four caliber teams. The SEC is really good at the bottom. Like, they don't have any really, really bad stinker teams like the Big 12 does in, say, Utah and Arizona State. But in terms of like what conference is really going to matter most in the postseason, I think there's an argument that it could be the Big 12.
Evan, I love that you rank the top 10 players on a regular basis. And if you could go a little bit into how you do that, because you have Iowa State's Joshua Jefferson as the 4th best player in the country. And we just did like our early season all Big 12 teams, and we both said he's the most underrated player in America.
I would absolutely agree with that. I mean, I think he should be a first-team All-American right now. But I think coming into this season, that was not the expectation. Tamin Lipsey was probably the most well-known player on this team. He's been a really good point guard for several years for Iowa State. And then you have Milan Momcilovic, who's a sharpshooter and really exciting to watch. But Joshua Jefferson has been the one who has been just absolutely dominant in all phases of the game. And like you said, he's pretty underrated, because he's not necessarily going to score 23 points per game like what we're seeing from Duke's Cameron Boozer. He's not necessarily going to be the most athletic, flashy player, but he is doing everything you want from this team. So what I do on my site when it comes to rating players is I have a metric called Bayesian performance rating. And basically it's an all-in-one metric that values how important you are to your team, and then overall on the court on offense and defense. It looks at your individual stats in terms of how good they are, how efficient you are, but it also equally looks at what is your impact on team performance when you're on the court. if you have a player who's really valuable, a winning player, that's going to lead to better performance for the team on the floor. When you take all of that into account, right now, Joshua Jefferson, I have him ranked as the 4th best player in the entire country, according to BPR.
Wow.
That's behind Cameron Boozer, who's been by far the best player in the country this year at Duke. Yaxel Lendeborg, who has been the standout player for Michigan, and Michigan has been utterly dominant. And then I have Braden Smith, the point guard for Purdue, who's having an outstanding year again. Will probably break the all-time the NCAA assist record this year. I have him at 3rd. And then Joshua Jefferson is at 4th. And then if you want to go down to that 5th spot, AJ DeBonce for BYU is 5th. So the Big 12 has 2 of the top 5 guys in the country, but I'm absolutely right with you. Joshua Jefferson, I think people who are really glued in on college basketball on a nightly basis do understand how important he is. But I think the general national audience at large who's going to be tuning in more to college basketball this time of year, they don't really know what he's doing yet.
Yeah, great point. I'm curious and I love to ask this kind of at this part of the year, if you've seen or found some interesting trends in maybe last year or the year before in terms of postseason success. Like what are indicators in the regular season of postseason success, Evan?
I think one of the interesting things when it comes to I kind of break teams down into 2 different categories when talking about postseason success. One is, can you make noise in the tournament? Will you win a game or 2? And that's a very different criteria from, are you national title good?
Yeah.
Because it takes a very different skill set to win 1 or 2 or 3 games versus 6. I mean, last year Texas Tech was one of the most interesting teams in the tournament. They almost made a Final Four, but they only won 3 games. That's only half of the way there. So when we're talking about those 2 things, I think when it comes to title contenders, one of the things I think is one of the very, very crucial is consistency on a night in and night out basis. Are your performances consistently elite? Because if you're a 1 or a 2 or 3 seed and you're at risk of having some nights when you're awesome, great, but then you also really struggle, that means it's going to be much harder for you to win 6 games. And so when I look at teams in the Big 12 when it comes to that, one of the things that you can see on my website if you go to the team ratings page is I have these little emojis next to some teams that indicate certain things about their style. And I have a little lock icon next to Arizona, which basically means they're one of the most consistent teams in the country from night to night. Their performances are always about the same, and that same level is awesome. They rarely wilt under pressure. I mean, we've seen that throughout this season. I don't know if there's a team I trust more when it comes to closing out games in all sorts of environments than Arizona. So that ingredient of their consistency, I think, should bode very well for them, and that's something that any team that's vying for a national title wants to have.
Now, you also have the volatile emoji next to Texas Tech, who's currently ranked number 22 in your rankings. So walk us through that.
Absolutely. Texas Tech is on the other side of this coin. That might not be a bad thing for them if they're getting in the tournament as a 4 through 7 seed, because sometimes if you're a bit volatile, what that means is you have the ability to beat a really good team on a given night. We saw that earlier this season with them knocking off Duke in a game that they absolutely had no business winning whatsoever because of their foul trouble in that game. And Duke is one of the best teams in the country. But then equally, we've had some from games from Texas Tech where they got blown out by Purdue by 30 or something like that. And so they've had a bit of a struggle having that consistency from game to game. And if I were to point to one issue with them, it's something identified with Texas Tech early in the season. I think it's reared its ugly head so far this year. Outside of their top 2 players in Christian Anderson and JT Toppin, and if you want to throw Lawan Watson there as a third, there's really not a lot of depth on this team. There's several really, really good players, but when you get down to your 7th, 8th, 9th best guy, they really struggle to get meaningful minutes. And then if you're having games where you have guys in foul trouble or injury trouble, that is a massive, massive swing from their best to their worst that we can see in games. So that'll have to be something we'll monitor with Texas Tech going forward.
How often do you adjust your models? Is that something you kind of evaluate in the off season? Just kind of curious for your overall approach in your models.
Yeah, I'm typically taking notes during the season of new things that I can change or upgrade or add based on things I'm seeing, and I usually then will kind of overhaul those things during the off season because it's a lot of work to kind of make those changes, and I always want to be very meticulous and accurate with the way I implement those. So usually it's an off season task for me.
Evan, how did your rankings hold up in the NCAA tournament this past year?
Well, I think the top 4 teams I had going into the tournament were the 4 1 seeds, which, again, is not a huge surprise because those were the 4 best teams in college basketball. But I think something we saw coming into the tournament last year, and we will see if this trend holds this year, is that there was just a really big gap between the top teams in the country. There was a very clear top 5, 6, or 7 teams going into the tournament, and I felt very comfortable saying it's going to be one of those teams winning the title. And we ended up getting the 4 best teams in the Final Four. And so from that perspective, it was accurate, but it also was kind of easy to predict. So I think what'll be interesting this year is I think that last year coming into the tournament, we had the 4 1 seeds. We had 1 or 2 other teams who were definitely kind of close to that caliber. But then there weren't really any other teams you felt really comfortable saying could make a deep run. This year, I think we have a very excellent crop nationally of title contenders who are going to be 1 seeds, but I also equally think that there's another group of maybe 5 to 7 teams who will be in that 2 to 4 seed range who all are really dangerous and could knock off any of those teams. And I don't think that's any slight on those top teams. I just think the top 10 or so teams in college basketball this year are all really, really good. And so I'm very excited to see how that plays out.
Talking with Dr. Evan Miyakawa from EvanMiya.com. Does great work. Always fun to visit with Evan, and he's been a constant on our show here talking through all of these things. Who's the most underrated team in the Big 12 right now?
Ooh, good question. I think the most underrated team in the Big 12, this is kind of weird to say. Kansas might be my answer here. And this is a little bit interesting because Kansas has been in the headlines for all of the wrong reasons so far this season, with Darren Peterson being in and out and in and out. And I think the casual viewer, and this has kind of been my experience so far, is kind of getting a little bit tired of tracking, is Peterson healthy? Is he not healthy? Is he playing? Is he not playing? Is the team even better when he's playing? Is it better when he's not playing? And so for that reason, I think you might just be able to say, okay, they're due for making the tournament, maybe winning 1 game and then bowing out. But the fact that they have played a majority of their season without Darren Peterson and some of the results that they've been able to have, and the fact that without Darren Peterson being healthy, and even when he's in and out, you've got to imagine that has some sort of effect on the locker room and the chemistry and the focus of that team. They're still ranked as a top 20 team in the nation all the way up to this point with all of this stuff going on. If they end up finding some level of consistency either with Peterson playing or without him, I think they have gone through this stretch of the season so far with all of these troubles and handled it very well. You know, they have lost a few games that they normally Kansas wouldn't want to lose. But from a predictive analytics standpoint, being a top 20 team after going through all of that is still really promising. So I think there's a chance that Kansas could still be a lot more dangerous than people are maybe expecting come the postseason. So it's weird to say Kansas is an underrated team, but I think that they have handled what they've done so far well. And so if they can find some more consistency in terms of what they're doing from a personnel standpoint, they could be pretty dangerous.
You know, it's really interesting, too, Evan, how the Darren Peterson situation sort of skews your numbers. Maybe not skews, for lack of a better way to put it, but I'm sure the Darren Peterson situation has to confuse your models a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I do with all of my models is I do make adjustments for players who are injured. So if Kansas or another team is missing a star player, all predictions for that team, if you go to their game predictions, you would see how that's kind of adjusted for those injuries, and you can even see where they rank nationally if you account for those injuries. And then kind of equally, it also looks at, accounting for if a player has missed part of the season, how does that impact a team's overall profile? And if that player is then back healthy, what do we expect from that team? So I do have ways of measuring that, but certainly the lack of consistency from the personnel standpoint has been something for sure.
Yeah, can you break down what do your models say about Kansas when he's on the floor versus Kansas when he's not on the floor?
Yeah, this has been a very big topic of debate because there are some people who would probably argue that Kansas has not been as good when he's been playing. When you overall look at it, it's pretty much net neutral. When you on my stats on my website, I basically can look at how well does a team play with or without a player on the court. And Kansas is about 3 points per possession worse with Peterson on the floor, adjusting for opponent strength. That's pretty negligible. Most players are within 5 or 6 points of 0 on either side. And I don't think there's necessarily enough data there to make strong conclusions.
Fair point.
But certainly it's not like we've seen Kansas being awesome when he's there and horrible when he's not. Other players have really stepped up in his absence. I mean, Melvin Council Jr. has basically, if you squinted, you might just assume he's Darren Peterson when Peterson isn't playing, because he's been really incredible. And I've seen comparisons to Michael Jordan out there for him when Peterson's not playing. So other players have stepped up in his absence, which has been great. And so we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, was that you who tweeted the picture of Michael Jordan that said Melvin Council when Darren Peterson's not playing?
I did not, but I enjoyed that.
Evan, if the NCAA tournament started right now, how many teams are in from the Big 12?
Good question. Right now, I would say if you actually go to my website, according to resume quality, which is a metric I have that basically measures based on how hard your schedule was and how difficult it would be for another team to play against your schedule, who is the most deserving to be in and where do they slot? And right now, according to those numbers, I would have, looks like 9 teams from the Big 12. So those Big 6 that I mentioned, and then UCF, Oklahoma State, and Baylor. Baylor would just be right inside the field with TCU be on the outside looking in. Those are really your 10 teams that are kind of in contention right now, that are pretty close to being in the tournament, if not in. You've got Colorado, Kansas State, and Arizona, who are kind of lurking outside, but they would really need to have some nice runs in conference play to kind of put themselves in the conversation. So right now I'd have 9 teams in, with a 10th just on the outside.
Awesome stuff. Man, Evan, your work is so detailed. It's so good. We appreciate your time. And
you're the best, Evan. Thank you.
EvanMiya on Twitter or X, EvanMiya.com is where you find him. Evan Miyakawa joining the show. Thanks, Evan.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
All right, man. See you later. Evan Miyakawa, college basketball analytics at EvanMiya.com, trusted by over 100 Division I teams. He's been featured in ESPN, CBS, The Athletic, and The Wall Street Journal, and he joins us here on Big 12 Today on Big 12 Radio.